I know you vintage lovers. I know you guys. I know what kind of people you are. You know, listen, I'm telling you, vintage is not always better. In most cases, it's not. Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today it's finally time for another and brand new Snare of the Month video. Actually, I've been planning to review this snare for quite a while now, and I finally did it. So here is it, my vintage Rogers chrome over brass Dynasonic snare. This snare almost needs no introduction. It's one of the legends. I mean, Rogers used to be a very high-end American company. Vintage Rogers drum kits and snares are very sought after on the internet. And then the company stopped existing. And then a couple of years ago, an Asian corporation decided to buy the Rogers name and started to produce drums again under the name Rogers. But this one is an actual vintage one. Experts will see this at first sight because they do make some new wood Dynasonics, but they don't make the actual chrome over brass ones. So there are some brass snares that they do, but they're not chrome plated. So what is a Dynasonic? It has this, excuse the toilet paper please, very special, unique rail system for the snares. You see the snare wires, they are sitting on this rail, and when you engage them, the whole rail system goes up and presses lightly against the bottom drum head. Why? On that rail, you can pre-tighten the snares. By turning this knob, you can, loosen or tighten the snare wires. So right now the snare wires are not touching the drum head. I'm gonna loosen this. So here, if you hear the sound of the snare wires, pretty loose. And now I can tighten it as much as I want. And now the snare wires are still not touching the drum head, but now, if you can hear the difference, they're pretty tight. The approach here is you can have the sound of very tight snare wires because you pre-tighten them by themselves. But then, when you engage the normal throw-off, you're just lightly pressing those pre-tightened wires up against the bottom drum head. So it won't be choked. The vintage wood ones are much harder to find, but on the other hand, you don't really need those because there you can buy the new ones. And the vintage chrome over brass ones, they're pretty easy to find. I mean, they're not cheap, but they're also not crazy expensive. Talking about some other specs here, so this drum is actually from 1974 and it has the scripted Rogers logo. At some point they introduced the big R logo, beaver tail lugs, and it has an internal muffler, an internal dampener there inside. That used to be a thing, then it used to be a no-go, now it's kind of a thing again. I'm not a big fan, I have to say, because it adds pressure to the head from the inside, so it changes the pitch a little bit and it's a very extreme way of muffling. And I really don't like it on this snare drum, and I'm gonna talk about this in a second. So yeah, that's the snare that a lot of guys used. The Rogers Dynasonic was the high-end snare drum that all the endorsers and artists used to play, including Buddy Rich and a ton of others, I'm sure, also. So yeah, of course I was very excited about this drum, and then I got it. I was so excited. I put it onto my drum kit and I hated it. It sounded really bad. I mean, art and sound, I mean, that's all subjective, you know? But I couldn't get warm with this snare drum. It was really, it had some overtones. I felt like it was very dry and very choked, which is actually not supposed to be, because it's supposed to be non-choked because of that rail system, but not choked in the sense of the snare wires, but more like the actual shell sounded choked. And it had some overtones, but once I wanted to control those overtones and experimented with the internal muffler and also some dampening gels, it sounded completely dead, like really very strange sound. It's a very loud drum too, but choked. It's loud and choked. It's very staccato. I thought, okay, this can't be real. I mean, this is one of the most legendary, most famous drums ever. I'm doing something wrong. So I took it to a friend of mine, Wolfgang, who has a drum store and sells vintage drums. He's kind of an expert in vintage drums and drum sounds. He too said, yeah, there's something wrong with this particular drum. So we changed a couple of parts. First of all, we changed the bottom head. The pre-owner where I bought it from, they just put a normal snare reso head on there, which for this drum, quoting my friend, didn't really work, because with vintage drums, sometimes you have to use vintage style heads. So what we did was we put this Remo Weather King Classic reso head on. That certainly made it better. You could really see and feel that this head fits that snare drum much better than the head that was on there. And what we also did, we exchanged the snare wires, because it actually came with non-original Dynasonic snare wires, and that doesn't really work for this rail system. So we also exchanged the wires. Sounded a little better, but still not great. So then, next thing, we exchanged the whole rail system. A couple of years ago, you would not have been able to exchange the rail system. Now, having that new Rogers company around, you can buy all the spare parts for your vintage snares. So that's actually kind of great. So the rail is completely new. And that all helped very much, I would say. But although it improved the sound of the snare drum by at least 50%, I was still not really loving this snare drum. And I took it back home and I played it and I was like, yeah, okay, this is much better now, don't get me wrong. Still, I don't know. I guess it's just not my kind of snare. I'm not sure why Buddy and all those greats used to play this snare drum, but I mean, listen, number one, they were endorsed by those companies. And the second thing, they didn't have all the nice snare drums that we do have now. So vintage is not always better, guys. And I'm saying this, and there will be a heated argument in the comment section. This will be the beginning of the end of my YouTube career. I know you vintage lovers. I know you guys. I know what kind of people you are. You know, listen, I'm telling you, vintage is not always better. In most cases, it's not. So I'm not gonna say anymore. Vintage is great. I love it. I hate this snare drum though. I'm not a fan. I don't hate it, okay? But I'm also not a fan. You can have a look or a listen yourself. I go through all the usual tunings. I also use the internal dampener here and there, but I also use the crown gel and the second drum head, as I normally always do. But go ahead and try one out in the real world, so to speak, because I always liked the sound demos of this snare drum online. And then I hit it myself and I was really sad. So is this the greatest snare drum of all time? Of course not, the snare drum is a joke. That's all I'm gonna say for today. I'm not willing to roast and shit talk this snare drum anymore. So enjoy the rest of the video and thanks. Thanks, guys, for watching. There's nothing more to say, except please consider subscribing to my channel. Check out all the other stuff I do here. I do a lot. I should do more. But there is some stuff to check out already, so please go ahead and do so. For example, my 17 episode completely free course on hand technique. This is gonna make you faster. Faster. You want to be fast in this world. Fast is the new sexy. That's not... I see you next time. Until then, take care and goodbye.